Hugo Chavez once made a big promise that he would destroy poverty in Venezuela. Not only was this promise both unrealistic, but it was also unfulfilled, which is what we are willing to change with a stronger enforcement system that is exclusive to our side. Proud to propose. First on setup, two pieces of framing. What does the status quo look like? We tell you that politicians are incentivized for election/re-election, so campaign promises are key, right? Why is this true then? We tell you that voters, although they vote based on their political party, nevertheless, the types of politicians matter. Why is this true? They still take into consideration the promises that the politicians make in their pre-election speeches, etc. Because that is like the main detailing thing that tells that tells the voters like what type of decisions they're going to make, right? Then we tell you that because of their strong election incentive, we tell you that the promises are not necessarily true. For example, like Trump's promises to replace Obamacare, but we tell you that the main problem is not just the fact that the promises are not fulfilled, but the fact that these promises are unrealistic. Then, what do the sanctions look like? Moving on to our model. These looks like direct deterrence to politicians. For example, like reduced campaign funding or party-based penalties. For example, like pulling them down from a higher position in their political power. But we tell you if there's a pattern of no fulfillment, this will lead to like a temporary leave from office, and in extreme cases, this will lead to like a leave of office at all. Then moving on to our first argument. What's our premise? There's accountability and incentives to fulfill realistic promises to our model, which is exclusive. Why is this true? Two structural reasons. First layer of mechanism on how there's main problem with on the main problem with promises. We tell you that the main problem with promises is not the fact that there's no fulfillment, but the fact that they're unrealistic promises. Because in order to be re-elected, we tell you that the politicians have to satisfy like their corresponding party. For example, like Trump having to satisfy the conservatives. And we tell you that since most first world and third world countries have like two major political parties, we tell you that satisfaction is mostly a polarized decision, meaning that political leaders who come from the left are more likely to make promises that are only good decisions like in the left's point of view. Right? Then why is this true? Then we tell you that this is extremely unrealistic. Why? No matter which party is in charge, there are opposition from other parties, and some decisions polarized to one side can't be pushed or fulfilled. Why is this true? We tell you that in order to like pass laws or policies, they have to go through legislation and Congress, with representatives from different political parties, meaning that like these promises are unlikely to be fulfilled in the first place. Nevertheless, we tell you that these promises, like these unrealistic promises, are still made due to like a re-election incentive, since there's no efficient method of deterrence in the status quo. Then, second mechanism on incentives. Why our model is effective. We tell you that due to reputation incentives, no matter the political party, the reputation matters. Because even if they're conservative, someone who constantly spread lies will have a bad reputation to both political parties, meaning that the party is blown away, but also there will be backlash from voters, etc., which strongly like decreases like the morale of voters from that party, meaning that there's a lower likelihood that they will win. Second, on the fear of loss of power. We tell you that sanctions could be political party consequences, for example, like being brought down from like higher positions. This kind of likely to be efficient.
I
Okay.
sorry, I think
The second on why alternatives.
okay. You can continue. Yeah.
Second on why alternatives don't. Second on why alternatives don't work. We tell you that if the information doesn't go directly to the public, unlike sanctions, most of the time, if like the information doesn't directly go to the public, there's a higher likelihood that there are alternative methods that happen behind closed doors, meaning that corruption still exists within politics. Due to all these reasons, it is most likely that the politicians are more likely to make realistic promises that are more likely to go to Congress and severely think of like if these decisions are realistic or not. Because so at the end of the day, there's more there's more voter confidence at the end of the day, and we tell you that politics and the world overall is better. So proud to propose.
Do you really think those politicians are all able to always save those plans? They are also humans like us. Not all society situations are going into the helpful road for the politicians or the campaign parties to solve or finish the plans they had promised. There might be some personal issues or inner conflict that could latent those plans to be done. The governing team is only promoting those politicians to force those politicians themselves for the plan, even through the unsupportable society flaws. So to support and explain about these kinds of ideas, now I would like to first rebut for the previous speaker's argument. So the first speaker's argument was about the politicians has the incentive and responsibilities to make realistic promises. Of course, many politicians, many and most of the politicians are being responsible to give promises that are being able to become true in the real life. But how? No, thank you. The voters and however, the voters and citizens will be able to distinguish what promises will be realistic to become true in real life in the first place, because they are the subject to watch and look at those politicians. And if the yes, and the second argument of the Prime Minister's arguments was about the politicians' fear for power loss, but however, this is also being able to be distinguished among citizens, because those politicians, because the citizens would be able to watch those politicians' achievements and performance, that they will be shown that they are feared for power loss, etc. Now I'll move on to our first arguments about not all society situations are going ideally for the plan to become true. Yes, the politicians has the responsibility to hold those promised plans for the voters to result for a beneficial or supportable society for those people or for all citizens. However, we should not always just punish or warn those people who had really gained their effort though to solve a problem and promise their plans. Those innocent and responsible true politicians might face conflict or problems by going through those tasks. For example, they might be gaining resources or buying resources or making rules to prove and protect those plans to become true. However, they might face the problems for some resources income being locked, for any country for some country conflict problems, etc. Or maybe face some conflicts of some institutions preventing those plans to be supported by the reason for new situations or elements appearance. Regardless, seeing these elements and reasons by the politicians and just warning them is not so much fair. The government team is not trying to make the politicians to provide reasons why they had failed for the plan, and just looking at the apparent situation that those politicians are bad because they didn't promise the plan for no reason. Also, even if the government team is thinking and arguing that they are not going to punish the politicians strongly and just giving warnings, but however, this would eventually worsen the case that because the politicians would receive pressure due to the rejected reasons, and even if they claim that they will give the warning in case for listening the reasons, it won't make them more confident, just making them more forced and stressed by those warnings. This may eventually lead to politicians to finish the plan not as a high quality, that is will be more not so much beneficial, or may fail the task to fulfill the campaign promises that will eventually make more citizens more frustrated without knowing the required elements. So by these reasons, proud to oppose.
The Magna Carta, the British Declaration of Independence, was a huge development in democracy. After this was declared, the English Bill of Rights, the American Constitution, and more declarations emerged. This is a clear example of what one powerful law can do in the long term. Moving on to my rebuttals, they told us that there are structural issues why politicians cannot fulfill promises. First of all, we have no clear mechanisms nor examples of when this came true. However, many politicians, as we give examples, lie to get elected. Even if there were no concrete examples, most politicians in status quo main incentive is to be elected, not the best interest of citizens. Second, as David already told you, our main goal is to make promises realistic enough to make sure that it can be fulfilled through sanctions. Citizens They also told you that citizens have a responsibility to recognize lies. First of all, this is not true, as citizens are the owners of this country. Politicians who want to gain influence should tell the truth, right? As I will expand more on this in the principal part of my extension. Third of all, they came up to the podium and told you that politicians get pressure and that it's unethically wrong to punish. So the role of a politician is to lead the country on behalf of the citizens. I don't know why it's ethically wrong to punish someone who lied to the people who they're going to represent, right? Additionally, even if this is not true, our model says that through repeated offenses, meaning that we will catch people doing repeated offenses, not doing one wrong thing. Therefore, I think it's proven enough that politicians do the bad thing and therefore should be punished in opposition's world. So moving on to my extension, 2 main points. First of all, how not fulfilling campaign promises is principally wrong and generates practical harms as well. Second, how sanctions can lead the way for further development of political control and trust for civilians. First, framing what campaign promises actually look like and are in status quo and op. It's what a politician promises says civilians and individuals in order to get them to vote for them or a certain party. Promises are often rash and based on lies that politicians don't intend to fulfill once elected. However, it also has a big impact on a lot of people on what politician or what political party to vote for. Most people often fall for lies and believe certain promises because of their lack of political education, etc., right? Politicians often use misdirection to misguide civilians. Second, framing what principle politicians go against when not fulfilling promises. Inherently, citizens are the owner of the country. Therefore, politicians don't have the right to deceive them. The right to know is a core human right that should be exercised everywhere, and even more when politics, a representation of a whole country, is involved. Let's weigh the severity of harms involved in lying in politics. Opposition supports a world where the leader of a country is decided by false promises. For example, George H. Bush's famous no new taxes code was what guided people to vote him and elect him. However, he imposed even higher taxes to deal with the political budget after the election. Why are sanctions the best way to solve this problem? For a few reasons. First of all, it is a direct and very strong deterrent for politicians, even one with great power. For example, not only does it stop them from lying about promises and making rash, unrealistic ones, it also deters them from doing other wrong actions. This is the threat of sanctions indirectly exists in other areas as well. Think of this as a first step to a more credible government for citizens. Sanctions for false promises act as a precedent for other new emerging laws that may have been rejected or pushed back in the past. For example, war control limits about nuclear weaponry control or term limits in certain countries, right? If we use our fiat for one action or law, it's just an example for other laws that can emerge. Third, framing why our model is much more effective than any other countermodel. Simply put, it's direct. Politicians get punishments which incentivize them to change themselves. However, countermodels such as education only change the minds of certain citizens and does not influence politicians negatively directly. Additionally, this does not influence every person, as certain people are politically apathetic anyways, and certain people do not have the financial or temporal capacity to learn. Also, decisions made behind closed doors are more prone to corruption, as with the nature of politics and the status quo. Framing the long-term impacts of sanctions, even with opposition's model, because they don't directly punish politicians, they will always lie, leading to civilians believing that politicians always lie, etc. Opposition's world is very politically unstable, and the trust between civilians and the government is very bad. They have a negative pace, and therefore, because they have no positive material, this is also bad. Because of these reasons, so proud to propose.
DPM has mentioned that they lie to the citizens and that they're representing and they should be punished. But sometimes the politician doesn't have all the power to change everything. The DPM also didn't give evidence that all politicians will be corrupt. Moving on to my argument. Panel, the politicians are there to persuade people, like the proposition said, that they're there to represent the citizens. If we're punishing them, what's the difference between us and an ungrateful dog? Thus, we are proud to oppose the motion. This House would impose sanctions and politicians who don't fulfill the campaign promises. Here's what you can expect from this argument. Number one, how it is morally wrong to do this. Second, how they're lawfully protected. Number three, and thirdly, the reason why all this matters. Notice that our burden is that we have to prove that they can just walk away without getting any punishment whatsoever. But that is not what we're saying. We're not saying that we shouldn't give them any punishments at all. We're saying that the government's notion of punishment is way too harsh. Putting them in a sanction is way too harsh. Instead, here's what we can do. We can give them a fine, or we can give public notice to dent their reputation. They don't have the power to manipulate everything that's going on. So that shows like even if the politicians try, sometimes it might not go the way they planned that. So this is a fair punishment. The law doesn't obligate the politicians to require them to keep their promises. The government is exaggerating because they don't keep just because they don't keep some promises doesn't mean that they're breaking all the promises they made. They promised they're going to do. Even if the claim of the people's incentive for voting them is true, the real reason why people vote is for politicians is that they think that this person is better than the other person. The politician's job is supposed to represent the citizen, not check out a bucket list to make the citizen happy. Why do all these matter? Number one, electing is a huge waste of time. It's inefficient. So if we disbar one politician, then we have to elect another one, right? How do we know that both of them are going to be corrupt? How do we know they're going to be good? And it's going to be really inefficient. Not to mention all the chaos that's going to happen when they're disbarred. Elections take a lot of time and is very inefficient, therefore proud to oppose.
Supporters of certain politicians choose them because they are certain that the promise made should be kept and that these promises will lead to positive outcomes. Ironically, in the status quo, the majority of politicians bring up unrealistic bluffs for simply the appeals to society and simply for them to gain certain high positions, deterring this problem completely. So proud to oppose. Now, rebuttals. First, they said that voters have the responsibility to distinguish whether a politician is lying or not. Yes, it is the voters' right to choose good politicians, but it is not utterly the fault of them. Why? Because it is the politicians' fault in the first place, since they lied to the society about what they were going to do as civilians, or what they were going to do as politicians. So it is not the people or the civilians' fault of believing in the lies that they made, right? It is the liar's fault. Now, they also say that it is ethically incorrect to punish these politicians. However, we think that we're not saying that politicians have to do everything that they said in like a week. Our model said that we give them time, and when a pattern of politicians, and when these politicians show a pattern of ignoring their promises is shown to the public and to the government itself, they are going to get sanctioned. This shows the clarity of our case, since our model clearly separates good and bad politicians by giving them time, and if some politicians keep their promises, then they can stay in their position. However, if certain politicians keep a pattern of not keeping their promises, they're going to be sanctioned. Judge, see how this is very justified, and we are trying to promote justice, right? Now, they also say that politicians receive pressure, but I don't get why this is bad, since it is good, since it actually motivates the politicians to solve their promises and social issues, right? They also say that sometimes politicians have no power to change everything, and that the government is harsh in punishments. But we actually think that since we're actually giving them the enough amount of time to actually to prove their capabilities and solve their promises or keep their promises, we think that since our society is more just, and that these punishments are and that the punishment should be harsh, in which we're trying to deter and take weird politicians out of the government, we think that we take this case, right? Now, they also say that electing is a waste of time, but if we're choosing better politicians for society, I don't get why this is a bad point. Now, they tell us that our model is too harsh. But first of all, they didn't mention a counter model. But second, we tell you that their method is not going to directly affect citizens in a more just way. Before I move on to my class, I'll take a POI.
So you said that we didn't give an alternative model. So I think we did, because we offered like another alternative, like denting their reputation and like giving them a fine. So
Okay. But first, that is why we're saying that it does not directly affect the citizens, and your model is not effective, since we should harshly deter these bad politicians, and your model doesn't actually give politicians a strong incentive on our side to make realistic models, right? Now, what is our clash? It is societal impacts. Proposition says that there are going to be ethical harms towards politicians on our side. However, opposition says that there's going to be a clear deterrence to bad politicians, and that our society is ethically justified, since the promises made politicians in that position itself, then they should be kept, right?
Now, our impacts are more important and more likely since we have better likelihood and stronger impact since, first of all, we win in scope in which we affect the whole society into having great politicians and politicians with incentives or strong incentives to actually keep their promises, right? This allows the society to be more just and to actually fix world problems or the solutions or the problems addressed by the politicians that they are going to solve, right? We also think that the society is going to have more positive norms due to these better politicians that are freely elected by the citizens, and when they are proven clearly that they do not have that they're not doing a good job within the government and within politics, they're going to be sanctioned out. This is why society is much more just, more fair, and more positive on our side. Thank you.
Politicians are a very important role in our country, leading and conducting the country. Without politicians, the country would have a lack of leaders and conductors, which could cause the downfall of the country. The election of politicians usually come from their speeches, persuading citizens to vote for them and promising them to fulfill their opinions. However, as some politicians fail to fully keep what they speak, many people ought to punish politicians for them. But is this the right action, and is this a beneficial action? Today, our team is going to present why politicians shouldn't be punished when not fulfilling their promised plans. Today, I'm going to present two clashes and take the debate home. The first clash is a world that allows to try and vs the world that doesn't allow failure. Politicians, of course, try to best to sustain themselves in the politician spot, and to sustain themselves in the politician spot, they need to fulfill the citizens' needs, and they need to fulfill the citizens to keep sustaining them. However, when they're trying to fulfill the citizens' needs, and when they're trying to do it, there can be some unexpected burdens and unexpected tasks. And if they fail some tasks, and if failure is not just in this world, they will get punished. And we need to make a world where trying is possible, and trying should be possible for the politicians, and not failure. If failure is not allowed, then politicians or rejected. The politicians won't be there. The second clash is which gives better effect to the country. To be a politician becomes a big pressure when they fail. They become sanctioned. It means that the politicians will be in big pressure, and they need to fulfill all citizens' opinions, or the citizens won't vote. And if they don't fulfill, if they fail to fulfill all the citizens' opinions and what they said, then they will go to sanction. And if they just say they're gonna do what they can, then the citizens won't vote for them, because the citizens will think it's too small for them to vote. And if they fail, they will be punished, and less people will want to become politicians. And only some politicians with small promises promises and small tasks will go, and people won't be happy because their opinions, the politicians don't say their opinions is going to be fulfilled. And the country will be in a risky state because citizens are angry and citizens are bad, but politicians, there are less politicians, which is very bad. And now I'm gonna present the best case for the government and the worst case for the opposition, and compare between those two. The best case for government is that politicians will tell the truth, but politicians, of course, will decrease because of the pressure, and because the citizens will vote for them when they have small fulfillment promises, and when they say they're gonna fulfill and even fail when they're going to sanctions, and which can burden them a lot. And the worst case for opposition, which is our team, is that politicians will not fulfill, and they cannot fulfill, but try their best, which is a status quo, which is not in a bad way, in a chaos state right now. Judge, you can see that even when comparing the best case for government and the worst case for opposition stands out more. Therefore, the motion, our house thinks the motion should fall. Thank you.
In this debate, our opposition team and the government team was looking for a more stronger and beneficial way that the politicians would be able to promise their campaign plans. From the both teams' characterization for campaign plans was the promises of politicians that they would change the specific promises of politicians would that they will be changed the specific rules or laws to make the society more beneficial for citizens. In the ops view for this, politicians' promises are flawed and too big to become true because they stand those to get more voters and votes and won't receive incentive responsibilities that they really need for the good for citizens. However, the opposition team is not seeing those parties and campaigns as a subject that gets power over is only seeing those parties as the subject that gets power over citizens and receives their own needs over not caring about citizens' goods. This is not always true in the real world. Not all politicians are able to have their not all politicians are not able to have their own incentives and responsibilities, yet most of them are really able to receive them, and they might have really know the importance of activities for citizens' needs and possible and has the possibility to face problems of elements that limits them to prove so. The government team is forcing the politic situations as to make the real good people to not stand and harsh the atmosphere to make more higher gaps between citizens to get interest on those politics, which are very important and facing a lot of problems among many countries. Our opposition team strongly regrets these kinds of work to make more gaps between citizens and politicians that will weaken citizens' power. The government team claims that by the motion it will be more beneficial for citizens and they will eventually receive more power. However, this is not really true and really realistic for in our opposition case by the supporting reasons for our speech. So by following reasons, proud to oppose.
Opposition has no idea of how our model works and politics works overall. I'll prove it then. First, some strategic blunders from side opposition. First of all, they can't understand our first argument because their main push was telling us that there's structural issues on why politicians can't fulfill promises in the first place. But they clearly did not listen to our speech because, as I already told you in first speech, the point of the sanctions is to make sure that the politicians will make realistic promises in the first place because of the incentives to avoid the sanctions. So at the end of the day, we don't only make sure that they fulfill those promises, but make realistic promises in the first place instead of like saying that we'll solve poverty, right? So then our counter model is that they have no counter models. They have a very unclear counter model. So even if we claim our benefits to the far minimum, we way over their case because they have absolutely zero mechanized positive materials. Then why is our model more efficient overall? A, sanctions can be noticed by the public. As Jason and I already told you, sanctions can be directly noticed by the public eye. Why? One, funding is cut significantly, meaning that like if the quality of like pre-election speeches or campaigns overall gets worse, it can be noticed by the public. Second, their position in the political party is lowered, which will obviously appear in news and like not be and be transparent overall, meaning that citizens can notice what happened. But in their unclear counter model, where they just give fines to the politicians without any cuts or strong models, A, the politicians can find loopholes to get out of the fines. B, the fines will do absolutely nothing because most privileged politicians can escape it without it permanently affecting them, right? So even if they pay, we tell you that it won't affect them in the long term. So then we don't only help the politicians fulfill their promises, but also we make them also to make realistic, like step-by-step goals so that those promises can actually be fulfilled, right? Considering the nature of politicians, it is realistic that a stronger model that actually helps enforces policies by making sure that we like appeal to the politicians' incentives and give them an actual incentive to like make realistic promises. We believe that that's what matters in this debate, and we are able to fulfill. Therefore, proud to propose.